And we're live. Okay. So welcome back. We have Instagram here. We have YouTube here. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about Alzheimer's disease. So what's going on with that? Well, over the past few days, there have been some articles that have come out about it. Not about the disease itself, but more about the treatments to it. So I'm linking the articles right now. They're on my Instagram story and they're in the description of this video. So I just put the links there just so you can kind of go off of what I'm going to take a few of these excerpts from. One of them's in on Science, and the other one is from Wall Street Pro, which the headlines are Blots in a Field, a neuroscience image sleuth finds signs of fabrication in scores of Alzheimer's articles, threatening the reigning theory of the disease. And the other one, 2 decades of Alzheimer's research was based on deliberate fraud by 2 scientists that has cost billions of dollars and millions of lives. So not too great. I do have some excerpts here from the article. So basically, kind of if I'm going through it, there were basically some scientists who kind of went down the rabbit hole and found that basically the original idea, or what we thought these drugs were treating, which were these beta amyloid plaques, were essentially the cause of the disease. But what happens is we find them, they tend to be associated versus the cause, and the drugs seem to be, targeted towards that. But they have very little success kind of over the years. So that's kind of been, a little bit about what's going on. So I do have some excerpts here from one of the stories. So let me just pull those up quick. Okay. Now, one of the drugs they're talking about, what makes the approval of the $56,000 a year drug so controversial is that while it does decrease the plaques, like I was just talking about, it doesn't actually slow Alzheimer's. In fact, clinical trials were suspended in 2019 after the treatment showed no clinical benefits, which did not keep Biogen, which was the company that created the drug, from seeking the drug's approval or pricing it astronomically. Alzheimer's research over the last 16 years might not just be wrong, but a deliberate fraud. And the pace of potential fraud unearthed by Schrag, who was the scientist. I hope that name is right. Schrag or Schrag, Schrag. It's not as if the world has changed overnight. So 4 months after Schrag submitted his concerns to the NIH turned around and awarded Lesney, who was the person who kind of came up with the idea, a 5-year grant to study Alzheimer's. That grant was awarded by Austin Yang, the program director at the NIH. The NIH's National Institute of Aging. And Yang, this author also, Austin Yang, was on the 2006 paper from which we have used to basically fund all of this research. It's basically, that's the paper that we've been using for 16 years to justify drug development for Alzheimer's disease. So that's kind of what's going on here. They concurred, Schrag, with his overall conclusions, which cast doubt on hundreds of images, including more than 70 in Lesney's papers. Now, again, that's the original 2006 paper. Some look like shockingly blatant, in quotes, examples of image tampering. Shockingly blatant. Now, that means that they're using altered fixed data that we have now used for 16 years to fund research for drug treatment for the past decade and a half, all of which now is based on fraudulent data, which means billions of dollars have been basically washed down the drain. And that's why you see Alzheimer's drug treatment effectiveness, it's like lower than 1%. Go figure. After reviewing the images, molecular biologist Elizabeth Bick said of the paper, the 2006 paper, the obtained experimental results might not have been the desired results, and that data might have been changed to better fit a hypothesis. Claiming that, yet again, they completely fudged the data. So that's where we're at right now. um, which is not so great. Um, Listen, Alzheimer's, it already does cost more, if you believe it or not, than cancer treatment. And it's going to continue to cost more. So, if you're someone who hopes that, say, Social Security is going to be something that you're relying on later years in your life, that's all going to be out the window when it comes to dealing with things like dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So, you have to remember this is kind of where this is going. Um, but let's talk a little bit about it, kind of what's going on with it, maybe something, what are some of the main causes, what can we do to prevent it, and then are there potential ways that we can, reverse it and hopefully make some headway here. So first of all, if we're talking about dementia, if we're talking about cognitive decline, you have to remember that Alzheimer's disease starts starts on average 30 years before you actually have the first symptoms. In other words, what we're doing today, what I'm doing today, I'm 30 years old, is going to affect my cognitive abilities at age 60. So we just have to be cognizant and aware of the fact that literally the decisions we make today, what we put in our bodies, what we expose ourselves to, what we inject in our bodies, what chemicals are in an environment, are the EMS we're exposed to, all of these are going to eventually affect us down the road. And this is becoming strikingly more common when we're talking about dementia and cognitive decline. So, really important to just kind of keep that in mind. Now, what does dementia necessarily mean? It's really an umbrella term for a bunch of different cognitive disorders. They're characterized by things like memory impairment, um, diminished motor activity, object recognition, disturbance of executive function, the ability to plan, organize, and abstract. So, those are kind of all things that are associated with, again, this umbrella term known as dementia. Now, when we're talking about cost, I got into that a little bit. So, Alzheimer's disease triples healthcare costs for Americans that are 65 years of age or older. Now, as of again 2010, these are some dated numbers, but 5.3 million Americans had Alzheimer's. That account for $148 million of annual cost. It's the sixth leading cause of death, and right now there is a new um, diagnosis, or someone that develops Alzheimer's every 66 seconds. 66 seconds. Roughly every minute, someone else is being diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer's, or something of a cognitive decline. So, really kind of important to kind of keep that in mind, kind of where we're going with that. Now, there are many factors that go into it. We're going to cover that in a second in terms of the number of potential things that could be causing it. There are definitely modifiable risk factors that you can play a role and that you can make a change with right now. What is really important to understand, and I really want to make this clear, is dementia is not is not a normal part of aging. It is not. Even though it already cost the US again over $600 billion per year, do we really need more research, or do we need to understand kind of what is going on and supporting it appropriately? Now, like I mentioned, there are modifiable risk factors that are definitely going to be playing a role with this. Now, the idea from a pathophysiology standpoint is that there's essentially a lot of free radicals. Free radicals are toxic essentially to brain cells. They can cause some damage, or if we don't have enough antioxidants, we can't neutralize them effectively. That essentially ends up causing some damage. When that happens, we can get too much. There's too much glutamate, or there's not enough going when we're stressed. When there is too much glutamate, it can also be toxic to brain cells. So if there's too much glutamate, if there's too many free radicals, there's an accumulation again of these beta amyloid plaques. This essentially leads to inflammation in the brain, and then it eventually leads to damage or decrease cognitive function over time. Now, like we said, the drugs that were targeting the beta amyloid plaques, they don't necessarily work. And again, that was based on fraudulent research back in 2006. So again, even though there are plaques there, are they necessarily causing the damage, or uh, the are they actually doing the harm? This is the argument for cholesterol too. It's the cholesterol has antioxidant properties, right? So when if you see cholesterol at the site of a plaque, is the cholesterol actually causing the plaque, or is it again using some of its antioxidant properties? We don't necessarily like that is where there seems to be like a discrepancy between kind of the two camps. So that's kind of where we're at. So, like I mentioned, there's an accumulation of these beta amyloid plaques. These could potentially damage blood vessels that supply the brain, or there could be clumps of proteins in the brain that cause plaques and cause issues, or there could be degeneration of nerve cells, or there's a combination of all three. So, one thing that might be worth looking into is a website known as sharpagain.org. You can look this up. Because when we're talking about dementia, when we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, there's generally seven main causes that memory loss can occur, and there's also things that we can do to either slow it down or reverse it. Some of them I talked about today on my Instagram post, so you can go back and check that out if you'd like. But let's get into those seven quickly. So those seven are, oops, sorry, something popped up on my screen. Those seven are mercury or other heavy metals poisoning. Now, we know heavy metals like aluminum uh, that you see in many different injectable things that I can't talk about here. They have an affinity for the brain, for nervous tissue. They're going to cause damage down the road. Prescription medications, things, we're going to get into those too. Stress, stagnation, not moving, inactivity is a big one. We'll get into that. Thyroid and other hormonal imbalances, just inflammation in general. We talked a little bit about that. Artificial food colors, flavors. We could throw things like glyphosate and endocrine disruptors in there as well. And then nutrient imbalances. Are we actually getting all the nutrients we need to do that? So first thing we got to talk about is mercury. Now, if you've been around here, I've talked about mercury. It's a literal known neurotoxin. The fact that these are still put in people's mouths today is, I think, criminal. If you happen to have a mercury amalgam filling, we got to get those out. These are literally toxic to the brain and the nervous system. I know this is anecdotal, but I have seen when certain people get these mercury amalgam fillings removed, their cognitive function improves almost immediately or within a couple days. Their energy levels are better. The brain fog lifts. They're able to remember things that they haven't been able to in years. It's pretty crazy. You could also find there's preservatives like thimerosal. You could find those in different injectables that I can't talk about. And these cause immune, sensory, neurological, motor, and behavioral dysfunctions. So not great. You could look further into thimerosal if you want. It's also known as ethyl mercury. You could kind of look deeper into that if you want, but definitely worth looking into. Aluminum is another one. It's just something that we're exposed to on a regular basis. This is why if you ever hear me talk about cooking, I don't cook with aluminum foil. It is also a known neurotoxin, and again, something you'll see in a lot of different injectables. Aluminum, at least as far as we know today, has no biological role in the body in terms of a benefit. So having it there is not necessarily a good thing. So what you're seeing is um, when you have aluminum adjuvants, they can potentially induce things like serious immunological disorders, also can lead to brain inflammation, neurological issues down the road. So, aluminum, heavy metals are definitely a huge thing. So, maybe there is some detox that has to be done. Maybe there is some, um, chelation that you might want to try. There's some foods that you can look into, things like, again, chlorella or cilantro or parsley. or other heavy metal, spirulina, other heavy metal chelators that you can use and that can help the liver kind of get rid of that. But what's really important is that we try to get rid of the sources that are always there. So that's really, really important. Certain prescription medications can also do it. And this is kind of really important as well to kind of understand here. So things like statins are crazy. So again, we talked a little bit about cholesterol. You have to remember that about like half of your brain's weight is due to cholesterol. So if you're taking a statin or a cholesterol lowering drug to bring that down, you have to figure out why it's high in the first place. Now, we do know that that one of the adverse effects associated with statin drugs is cognitive decline. And we also know that once you remove the statins, once you stop taking those statins, about 90% of that cognitive decline begins to reverse, begins to come back. So again, this is not medical advice, but what we do know is that if we can stop statins, if we come off statins, there seems to be, hey, some of that cognitive decline can resolve, can reverse. Pretty important to kind of understand. Another one, and this is a big one, it's going to be stress and inactivity. So we know that when we have high cortisol, when we have high stress, that's going to lead to a more inflamed body. When there's inflammation, that can also happen, inflammation in the brain. When there's inflammation in the brain, we get more of those beta amyloid plaques, which are associated again with cognitive decline. Hormone imbalances. If we have high cortisol, do you think your other hormones are going to be off to some degree? Of course they are. Whether it's, if you're in a highly stressed state all the time, we can't get into that rest and digest. We can't release certain hormones like leptin and ghrelin efficiently. We're not going to be able to digest our food properly because we're in a stressed state. We need to be in that parasympathetic rested state to actually actively digest our food. And that's going to lead to another one of the things we're going to talk about, which is nutrient depletions. Excess cortisol is also associated with cognitive impairment. Now, remember, if there is an impairment early on, if there is an impairment or if there is high cortisol, that's okay for a short amount of time. But the problem is when it's high for an elongated period of time, then we're constantly in that stress response. We're going to lead to issues that we're talking about before. It also, again, when we're in that stress state, we're getting a lot of that glucose taken from the cells into the blood so that it can be shipped out to cells because we're supposed to be running away or fighting in immediate threat. The stress that I'm late to work, the body, it perceives it the same way as it is a life or death situation. So you have to understand that is what the stress response there is for. Sedentary lifestyle is another huge thing. So literally, the less we move, our brain will literally start to shrink. So one of the best ways to stay cognitively sharp is to move our body, particularly doing movements that incorporate both sides of the hemisphere of the brain. So essentially exercises that are going to use, say, my left leg and my right arm. This is why you'll see a lot of doctors and trainers use cross crawl type exercises and sort of training methods, because that will get you neurologically working both sides of the brain. It also can interfere with healing. Why? If you're not moving, our lymph is not flowing. We don't have a pump like the heart to move our lymph. And even though we have twice as many lymphatic vessels as blood vessels, they don't move on their own. They only move when we move. So moving your body specifically is going to help you get rid of the junk, help the liver do its job, help the kidneys do its job to just get these things flowing. The more stagnant we are, the bigger an issue this becomes. We also know that the more physical activity that you can do, it's going to positively influence cognitive function, the sharper we are. And you might feel this after you do a workout, that you will feel a bit sharper mentally. We also know that physical activity, when the more physical activity you do, the more gray matter you find in your brain, which is really important. We also know that physical activity, again, reduces the risk of long-term dementia and things like Alzheimer's disease. It also counteracts neuronal loss, the loss of neurons, and behavioral deficits. In fact, in other ways, learning new skills, learning new motor skills can actually increase and stimulate the growth of neurons in the brain. So and not only is it going to increase this, stimulate the growth of new neurons, but also new blood angiogenesis, new blood vessels in the brain. So, and also the synapses between the neurons so they can communicate. So the more exercise you do, the more that it's going to really help not only stave off, but potentially reverse cognitive decline. Really important. And then we have thyroid and other hormones. So again, thyroid, we've talked about this before. This is the gas pedal for the body, right? The thyroid. So we know that apparently, as of right now, around 20 million Americans have hypothyroid, low thyroid. What we have to understand that the thyroid is the gas pedal. It basically it's the communicator between the brain and the other glands in the body to tell them to either slow down or speed up. So, and the thyroid is linked to cortisol too. So many times, if your cortisol balance is out of whack, your thyroid could be out of whack too. So it's kind of important. Sometimes adrenal fatigue can actually be misjudged or misdiagnosed as a thyroid issue. And this is why things like iodine are really important. Now, if you're not getting things like seaweed regularly in your diet, this is going to be a huge issue. It's really important for brain development. It's really important for iodine. I'm talking about is really important for brain development. It's really important for metabolism and maintaining and achieving optimal body weight. It's crucial for fertility, and we know how fertility rates are plummeting right now. We need it for immune system function to optimize that. Iodine also is antibacterial, antiparasitic, anti-cancer, and antiviral. Hopefully, they don't take me down for saying the V word, but you kind of see kind of what I'm talking about a little bit here when we're talking about the role of iodine and the thyroid when it comes to this. Now, inflammation is a big thing too. This could come from any of those four things that we already talked about, which is really important to understand. But so we have to talk about then microglial cells. So microglial cells are essentially white blood cells. They're macrophages found in the brain. Um, when if there's inflammation, that's going to tax these microglial cells, which are responsible for cleaning up the amyloid plaque. So if there continues to be more plaque buildup, we're going to have issues when it comes to that. And this is going to be from oxidative stress. And again, it's going to go back to, are we getting enough antioxidants, enough of a plant-rich foods, things like fruits and vegetables that are loaded with these antioxidants, vitamins and minerals we need to do that and negate some of these pro-inflammatory cytokines that are causing inflammation in the brain. And when we have overactive pro-inflammatory cytokines in the brain, we're going to get more inflammation. So there's a link with free radical oxidative damage, pro-inflammatory cytokines, and then these microglial cells, which are supposed to essentially keep some of that in check, but they need help from antioxidant-rich foods. So you see how all of this starts to come full circle in that way. Then we get to things like the artificial food colorings, endocrine disruptors. These are just going to be huge. So if we talk about a few of the bigger ones, so we know aspartame, it gets broken down into three different things like phenylalanine, aspartic acid, and methanol. If we break these down individually, so phenylalanine, it could reduce levels of serotonin and dopamine. Aspartate, aspartic acid, causes hyperexcitability of neurons, which leads to degeneration of astrocytes and neurons. Not great. Methanol causes central nervous system depression, vision disorders, and leads to metabolic acidosis and potentially coma. So we're talking about aspartame, and this is just one. This is aspartame. We're not talking about different artificial colors, different artificial flavors. You can see how we start getting these in over time, how they can really negatively impact our health in a big way. And again, that's just one. That's not talking about the different artificial sweeteners that are going to really disrupt the gut microbiome and affect that. And we know how the health of our gut is directly related to our brain health. And those are very interconnected in that way. So if our gut is not healthy, if we're taking in a lot of these artificial food colorings, flavors, that's going to disrupt the microbiome in a way that's going to eventually affect how we think and how we feel, especially now we're talking about how it affects dopamine and serotonin. We do need those neurotransmitters for a healthy functioning brain. And you're starting to see how this can affect, again, everything. So you see again how everything affects everything to some degree here. So it's not just that it's one thing. It's not just that it's one cause. It's all of these things kind of coerce together and things we can do to make it better. Then there's different nutrient deficiencies, like things like zinc. Zinc is a big one. We're going to talk about, omega 3s, B12, folate, vitamin D, vitamin C. Again, a lot of antioxidants, magnesium, selenium, which is not only important for as an antioxidant, but also really important for thyroid health, gut health. So things like probiotic, do you need to clean that up with things like, or soothe the gut with things like slippery elm or marshmallow root or licorice, or do you need to clear things out with berberine and oregano and grapeseed extract and garlic? Like it, all of these things can potentially be leading to it, and it's going to largely be affected by what we eat and what we expose ourselves to on a regular basis. So this is kind of where we're at this point when it comes to that. So let's talk about zinc a little bit. So one of the issues, what we know is that sometimes, well, not sometimes, sometimes, well, we do call sometimes Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. So we know that insulin resistance is going to increase inflammation, which is going to or inhibit our immune response and can lead to issues down the road. So when insulin resistance is present, we have an altered, diminished immune response. Getting that under control is going to be key, one way or another. Zinc comes in because it actually has some of those antioxidant properties, but also needs to be balanced with copper and also can be useful in healing the gut. So zinc plays a huge role in this. Now we know vitamin D, most people in the United States are vitamin D deficient. So getting outside, literally getting outside is going to be really helpful. It can act. Vitamin D is mostly a hormone. It actually is a hormone. So it's a misnomer calling it a vitamin. Nonetheless, it can also act as a neurosteroid hormone, which means that it can actually help rebuild or influence the production of, again, better, more, I should say, neurogenesis. So really important to kind of keep that in mind in terms of like what we're doing here. Folate's really good. So we know folate. Folate, if you look at the word fol, F-O-L, it's foliage. It comes from green leafy vegetables and plants. Again, things that most Americans do not eat. We know that low levels of folate are associated with things like different types of dementia, corticobasal degeneration, progressive supranuclear palsy, Parkinson's disease. These are known when we have low levels of folate, which most Americans have. So again, getting more nutrient-rich foods, getting more folate-rich foods, going to be really big when it comes to that. So things like turmeric. Now, turmeric gets a lot of publicity, usually because of curcumin. That is really kind of what we think it gives it most of its antioxidant properties. What we know is curcumin can actually help prevent neurodegenerative disorders because of its anti-inflammatory properties. The natural product of the curcuminoids actually can enhance clearance of these beta amyloid proteins. So, really important to kind of keep that in mind too. So, and then we're talking about, again, vitamin C, selenium, all of these different nutrients that are really, really helpful when we're talking about antioxidant protection, so that if there are potential plaques that could form, we can negate that and the microglial cells can do their job. So other things that you really need to do. Again, we talked about insulin resistance, getting rid of simple carbs, getting rid of gluten, getting rid of processed foods are all critically important, especially again, why is gluten bad? I've talked about this before, but largely it's because of the glyphosate. And we know glyphosate actually acts as an antibiotic in the gut. And again, when you put together the gut and brain connection, we see how there are real issues here. Other things that are really important, I talked about it, folate, getting more fruits and vegetables. Are we doing things that can reduce stress, like meditation and yoga? You can try things like NET. You can try things like emotional freedom technique. You can try things like ESR, like and work with a provider on that. And you could learn how to do some of this at home. So, all of these things we need to try. There's NLP, neuro linguistic programming. Any of these stress reducing techniques are huge. Another big one is staying active every day, like at least 30 minutes a day, every day. Not every day needs to be super intense, but literally moving your body every day is going to prevent cognitive decline. It is the best. It is one of the best ways to do it, and you have to move to keep your brain functioning properly. If you are not sleeping at least 7 to 8 hours a night, chances are your brain's not functioning the way it should. So we have to get there. Again, we talked about vitamin D, especially this time of year. We really don't need to be supplementing with it. We should be getting outside at least an hour a day, every day. And, if we spend enough time outside now at this time of year, you could actually bank enough vitamin D to be healthy in the winter. So, getting outside, getting that sun right now has tons of benefits. Other than that, it can actually help relieve stress as well. Because if we are rising and falling with the rise and fall of the sun, that's going to help regulate our circadian rhythm. That's going to help improve our sleeping patterns, and that's going to improve brain function down the road. We talked about oral health. So making sure you're getting rid of those mercury fillings is really, really cool. Um, it is going to be really, really helpful. If you have mercury fillings, try to find an IAOMT dentist. Try to find someone who's smart certified that can remove those. If there are other, again, metals like aluminum, like lead, like arsenic, like cadmium, you may want to do some sort of detox protocol, which I can kind of help you with if that's something you're interested in. Um, or if you're getting injectables on a regular basis, again, they could have things like dimerisol, like aluminum. Almost all of them have aluminum adjuvants, which are neurotoxic to the body, and they stack up over time. What else do we have here? Those are going to be the basics. You can also check things again. Omega threes. That was the other one I want to talk about. So omega threes. I've talked about omega threes before in the past, but really the goal is to have a balance between omega threes and sixes. In the United States, we tend to be way shifted towards an omega 6 dominant state. Now, we can increase our omega 3 fatty acid intake. That's one way to do it. But really, another key is to drop the amount of omega 6 fatty acids that we're consuming on a regular basis, because the average American is going to be 20 to 1 in favor of omega 6s to 3s. And supplementing your way all the way up to that is a little ludicrous, in my opinion. You have to be able to cut some of that back out too. That is really the basis of it. It is incorporating kind of all of those things. It's going to be, getting rid of the seed oils, the excess fats, eating out the processed foods. We have to come back to being more in touch with our food. We have to come back to making our own food and not using these exogenous oils and ditching the processed foods and sugars, because those things are all going to be key players in this. So, is this reversible? Is it something that you can clearly make improvements on? Listen, that's a lot we covered in 35 minutes. Where you start is up to you, but those are the big players in this game, and that's kind of really where you start with this. I just say start with like whatever you can to kind of get you going. There's a lot you can do. Again, when it comes to heavy metals and detox and stuff like that, I can help you if that's something you're interested in learning more about. Feel free to reach out to me if that's something you're interested in. Um, Again, all of these things are practical. All of these things are something that you can do, on your own time. And the choices we make every day are literally going to affect our outcome 20 to 30 years from now. And that happens right now. And it starts with the choices you make today. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see all you guys next week. Have a good one. Oh.